Welcome to Babelcom 5.
Okay, big spoilers for Babylon 5 ahead, so look away now if you don't want to be spoiled for major things to do with Babylon 5, okay? Good. I've had this knocking around in my head for a number of days now, and I posted on Reddit about it, but I want to sort of get it out to people who might be watching my Babylon 5 watch list, playlist, call it what you will, because you might have views on this. And this came to me in large part because I was rewatching it again for the first time in a long time. And I want to talk about time travel and Babylon 5. There isn't a huge amount of it, but it is really critical to much of the series as a whole when you actually stop and think about it. And it's the stopping and thinking about it part that's got me puzzling over some things. So let me run through with you Babylon Squared and War Without End, because those two between them establish various things about time travel in the Babylon 5 arc with which we are familiar. And I think that the most important element of those 3 episodes is that it means that we are in an established causal loop, if you like, of time travel within the series. Because had certain things not happened as we see them happening, we wouldn't be in the version of events that we are now in. So bear with me on this one. We know that in the course of Babylon Squared we meet Zathras, or was it Zathras? And he clues us into the fact that Babylon 4 is going to be moved in time to help with the Great War. So that sets things up. And we know that Delenn and Sinclair, of some unknown time period, although presumably in the future because we haven't seen it happen yet, are involved in moving the station. So we know that as well. And then in War Without End it becomes apparent that part and parcel of Babylon 4 being moved is to put it into the past to help with the previous war against the Shadows 1,000 years ago. And in order for that to work conceptually, Sinclair has to be transformed into Valen as the station is going back using a piece of equipment from Epsilon 3. Epsilon 3 is the planet that Babylon 5 is in orbit of, and it is also responsible for being the time machine for the purposes of that time loop. So the question that occurred to me was, and this very much depends on your interpretation of time travel in science fiction and the like in general, but imagine that you are a Minbari 1001 years ago. When you hit the 1000 years pre-Babylon 5 mark, what happens? The Shadow War is being fought at that time and the Volons are still helping, and we know from flash forwards of alternative events in War Without End, I think it was in particular, and in part in Babylon Squared from the time jumps there, that if Babylon 4 had not gone back, the Shadows would have been defeated 1,000 years ago, but not as heavily. So when we come to the current Shadow War in the 2260s, they would have been that much more powerful, and we get the distinct impression that Babylon 5 would have been toast as a result. Because we know that Garibaldi is seen trying to fight off invaders into Babylon 5, and we see Ivanova saying that he's rigged the fusion generators to go, and she's obviously, on the station as it seemingly is blown up at that point. So my question is, because Sinclair becoming Valen is dependent on the fact that he is picked out of a crowd in order to be interrogated and scanned by the Minbari, and that in turn means that Earth has to have met the Minbari and had a really bad first contact, as they did. What happened before those events had happened. So what I'm talking about, I guess, is the first time through the loop, before the loop is actually a thing. So that Minbari I was talking about 1001 years ago, when he comes to 1,000 years, a shadow war starts. But at that point, there is no Valen, because the events that lead to Valen being transported back haven't been triggered yet, because there is no Valen to trigger Sinclair being compared to Valen, which then leads on to all the other time travel shenanigans and the Vorlons being involved with time travel. So my question is, okay, the Minbari and the Vorlons win that war, but not brilliantly well against the Shadows. So we have one version of the story, effectively, where the time travel by the humans does not happen, and Babylon 5 is destroyed seemingly in that particular timeline. So if that's the case, what happens to actually change that timeline into the timeline that we come to understand should be the case, because that's the one that we're now observing? So that Minbari, so that Minbari survives the war, and the Minbari rebuild, but the caste system, as I understand it, is a product of Valen. So the Minbari don't have the caste system anymore. So do the Minbari even know about Earth at that point? Because they haven't had the hints from Valen that they're going to meet Earth, representatives, and the disastrous first contact may not happen as it originally happens. So do we then get a Zahadum resurgence 1,000 years later, which doesn't involve humans at all, and then it runs a different way? So it's kind of an intriguing one, because when I ran this on Reddit, people sort of said to me, well, no, the time travel happened because it always happened. But I thought, but the first time through, what if Valen doesn't come back with Babylon 4? Because those Babylon 4 events are intrinsically linked to Valen's existence, and you don't get the trigger for them unless Valen has gone back. So Valen hasn't gone back, there's no trigger for those events, and he wouldn't go back because he doesn't exist in that particular timeline. So what starts that Valen timeline version going, I wonder? And maybe Epsilon 3 is the clue to it all, because we've never found out who built the Great Machine on Epsilon 3, and we don't know why it was built, but we know it can do time travel. So is it possible that at some point one of the first ones, or one of the really, really early first ones who went beyond the veil, realised that things weren't going to resolve themselves, and the Shadows and the Vorlons were just going to keep on kicking around the younger races until basically the younger races were no more? And they then built a time machine and went back to build the Epsilon 3 time machine, having done some very clever calculations, and decided that they would plant the concept of Valen. Maybe somebody else was Valen originally, but the fact that Valen existed and was rumoured to be Minbari, not born of Minbari, then sort of travels down that timeline and triggers the events that then... But don't forget, the Trilunary also came from Epsilon 3. So Epsilon 3 could have been used to set the whole thing up if someone had time travel in the far future and for some reason wanted to change the previously existing timeline. And people will go, no, it always happened as we've seen it. Well, yeah, you say that, but then we have clear examples in the time jumps of alternate timelines where Babylon 5 was destroyed. So there has to be the possibility in the Babylon 5 universe, as is canon, of there being alternate timelines being a potential as part and parcel of that universe's established sort of science fiction fact, if you like. So you can't just ignore the fact that that has to be the case. That has to, there's definitely the possibility that things could have gone another way, and clearly taking the White Star back and affecting the move of Babylon 4 back to the war 1,000 years ago does have the necessary effect. And as one of the Vorlons says, Sinclair is the closed circle. He's the one who goes back to make sure that the future that we're used to then happens again, and those alternate timelines don't happen. But clearly, if he was never there and he never went back, he wouldn't be the closed circle. The closed circle wouldn't exist at that point. And I think on the first run through, there's no guarantee that events would have transpired, unless of course they always naturally transpire somehow in such a way that, you know, he always ends up being a sort of a fixed point in time almost. And maybe the Vorlons had something to do with it. Maybe the Vorlons had Epsilon 3 commissioned, and then they sort of erased their records of it so that they themselves couldn't interfere with it. Because I don't think Kosh ever passes any sort of comment about this massive multiple fusion generator powered planet existing underneath Babylon 5. But clearly the Vorlons knew it was there, because the Vorlons have known for 1,000 years how the next 1,000 years are going to play out. They've got a massive tactical advantage. And yet strangely, of course, we know they don't use it. So, you know, they probably know that the Shadows are going to go back to Zahadum. We know they've got rules of engagement with the Shadows, sure, but at the end of the day, they know it's going to be a problem. But there comes a point where they've obviously just got to sort of say, no, we've just got to let events run, because this is how they've run before. So even the Vorlons don't really want to mess with it. So I'm not really sure that there's any clear sort of solution to this. I watched a couple of videos on YouTube, things like the bootstrap paradox, where you enjoy Beethoven's and you happen to have access to a time machine, as you do. You go back in time to try and meet Beethoven, turns out it doesn't exist, but you've taken all his music back with you. So you then publish that music, and you in effect become Beethoven, and the music then travels up the timeline again to go back, and so on and so forth. But who created it in the first place if you weren't Beethoven? So this feels to me a little bit like that bootstrap paradox, where you've got, you know, the concept of Valen exists in the future, but when you go back you find that Valen isn't there, so you have to become Valen in order for that future to work, which is exactly what Sinclair did do, of course, and he can only do it because Epsilon 3 enabled that. So then the question does really become, very, very interestingly, who then enabled Epsilon 3 to have it in place to do all these trigger events which enable a better outcome than might previously have been the case. It's almost a little bit Bill and Ted, because it's like whoever wins out overall gets to put Epsilon 3 in place and have it play out so that it wins, so that you win and it comes out like that. I'm making no sense here whatsoever. And I'm quite sure that a lot of people will simply go sort of, no, that's just how it is. That's how the time travel worked. It always happened, therefore it always happened, therefore it always happened, and so we're fine with it. And that's fine. But I do know that, and this isn't something I'm overly familiar with, but I know that because of the Michael O'Hare's difficulties, the Sheridan and Sinclair story must have sort of to some extent flipped or changed at some point. So although they got him back to become Valen and go back in time, maybe that's what Sheridan would have done originally. And maybe, I think I saw reference to something being out of sequence. So maybe the version of events that we're looking at in the series as it happened almost not intentionally don't work, but inevitably don't work. And unless you overthink it in the way that I am now overthinking it, it doesn't really matter, because the time travel within the series as we know it is fine, because you know we know that we are in the causal loop that was established, and so we're running through that, and we run through it from sort of 1,000 years prior to the present, and then it stops, and then we're moving on with a period of time where time travel isn't predetermining anything. And it may well be that that's what gives old Kesh the ability to sort of go off and do whatever he wants to do along with the other Vorlons, because they think, well, all bets are now off. You know, we've got to that point, we haven't messed with the timeline, and here we are. Now we can choose to do what we want to do. So, obviously, I would very much like comments on this, because I'd be interested to see what what others think about this conceptually, whether or not I'm missing something. I appreciate I haven't given exact references for like, sort of the flash forwards and flash backs, but there are only 3 episodes that really cover this. I mean, there is also the episode where Sheridan lets a creature back into the rift that's been left behind, where Babylon 4 disappears. I've always wondered about that because it was quite it was almost a Kosh-like possession, and I don't think we ever really know much more about the hitchhiker than that it was an alien, and that's what it knew that was where it wanted to go. But I do kind of wonder whether or not that was a remnant of something, but I don't know where that would have come from or why. But I think Epsilon 3 is definitely one of the big sort of, why is it there? Who put it there? We just don't know anything about it worth a damn, basically. So it would be very, very interesting to understand the hows and the whys and the wherefores of it, because then things might click into place. But hey, maybe we're not supposed to know. Maybe that's the point. It might well be. Who am I to say? So so let me have your comments. I'll be genuinely interested, because I've got to that point now in the watch through where if you're going at the same pace as me, or if you've already seen the series before, obviously, then none of this will come as a shock, and it won't spoil anything for you because I've already covered these episodes. But that's why I wanted to put a spoiler on the front end of it as well, just in case, on the off chance you just come to this video, cold. So so let me have your thoughts. I'd be interested to see what you think about this conceptually, and about how you think it might have panned out had Valen not been around 1,000 years ago. Basically, that's the critical question, because it had things not run through without the foreknowledge of Valen, then what would have happened, basically? All right. Well, thanks for bearing with, and I'll see you in the comment section.